in this role here at the city, and I pray for wisdom for them, pray for boldness when needed, and we pray for your continued blessing on this community, and help us to be good stewards of the things that you've entrusted to us in each of our roles that we have. Pray for this meeting, and pray for it to go well, and all of us to be safe as we head back home this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Bosch. Appreciate it. Before I start, I got a little bit of a raspy voice from allergy, so I probably won't talk as much tonight as I normally do, and you'll probably all appreciate that. So with that, we'll start with the approval of the minutes from August 15th.
I move to approve. I second it.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you. Let the minutes also reflect we're all here. All right. Appreciate our visitors here tonight. Let's move into reports, oral and written communications. I've included a request from a group of women, founder of the Women for Ukraine from Akron, Indiana. I've included all the information in there that they're requesting that our citizens understand the importance of the Ukrainian independence 31 years ago, and I've got a short proclamation per their request that's in the notes as well in the written communications. So, and it just asks, I'll read it. Now therefore I, Joseph Tolmer, Mayor of Warsaw, on behalf of the citizens, do hereby proclaim this week, August 24th, as Ukrainian Independence Day, and request and urge all citizens to join in commemorating this important anniversary. On this day, let us recommit ourselves to helping the Ukrainian nation reclaim full sovereignty over its international borders and remember its heroes who sacrificed their lives to ensure the freedom and happiness of future generations. So certainly appreciative of their efforts and understand obviously the global crisis that they are bringing to our attention. So just want to make our community, certainly our community is aware of it, but on behalf of our community, respect their wishes and support this issue. So I don't know if you have any comments. If not, we'll move on. Okay. All right, our first guest is Dr. Nate Bosch. Nate's going to give us an update on lakes and streams. And I think we're all set to go, Nate.
All right, I brought some handouts here, and earlier today I was handing out exams to my students, so you guys are not getting grades. This is all fun things, but just a few publications that I think are helpful for you to see some of the work that we're doing, and stay updated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so what I wanted to do this evening is, because you guys are one of our funders at the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams, and your grant process really connects closely with the applicable Indiana code sections. And so what I want to do is highlight some of the work that we're doing here in the city of Warsaw related to those areas of Indiana code, related to the grant that you guys provided us this past year. So the four areas that I want to talk about are economy and tourism, health and service, parks and recreation, and then scientific facility and programs. First off, in the area of economic development and tourism, we work closely with our Conservation and Visitor Bureau on several different efforts, and I'll highlight some of those. You guys see some of these pretty postcards coming around. Those have been billboard designs over the last few years with our Clearly Kosciuszko campaign that we've done with the Chamber, KEDCO, and CVB with some Visitor Commission funding. The Lakes Festival is another great thing that we do with City of Warsaw. Our mission impacts the impact of our local economy as well, so I'll go through those, and then I'll highlight a few things on health and community service, protecting human pet health through algae research, chemical spill response, risk reduction, E. coli research. Then I'll go into parks and recreation and how we aid that department here in the city. Summer programs, the Lakes Festival, recreational opportunities, working on the Tippecanoe River, for example. And then I'll end with establishing, maintaining, and operating a scientific facility and programs here in our community. Show some pictures of our science complex, remind you of some of the K-12 things that we do in partnership with the City of Warsaw. So let's go through some of those examples. First off, we've got the economic impact of our Warsaw lakes. So Winona Pike and Center Lakes, you all know Warsaw, City of Lakes, blessed with 3 lakes in the city boundaries, which is pretty amazing. I don't know that there's very many lakes or very many cities that can boast that. These 3 lakes alone generate about $2.5 million of annual property taxes. Now, that is the lakes themselves. If there's additional property tax from the homes that are around those lakes, but the homes are all inflated in value because of the lakes. And so this is just the lake portion of the value of those homes around these 3 lakes. So we can explicitly say the lakes themselves are generating this $2.5 million every single year. The property values are, these numbers are a few years old now. They're probably over $300 million around these 3 lakes. Total county lake economic impact is about $313 million every single year is coming into Kosciuszko County because of our lakes. That puts it right on par with agriculture in Kosciuszko County. So we have the big 3 of Kosciuszko County is orthopedics, agriculture, and the lakes. Another area of economy and tourism that we work with is this Clearly Kosciuszko campaign. As I mentioned, some of the postcards came around there with some of the artwork that we're using for this Clearly Kosciuszko campaign. You all, likely, Indiana being close to Michigan, are familiar with the Pure Michigan campaign. And so this is our version of that we've been promoting for the last few years, again, with those partner organizations. And it's going really well. Businesses can become members. It's free to join. And we then can promote this Clearly Kosciuszko brand. We have a vision of, in the future, products that are being made here in Kosciuszko County, storefronts in Kosciuszko County are all going to be displaying this brand as something that residents and visitors alike are really proud of. And so any of you council members who are associated with a certain business that you'd like to become members of Clearly Kosciuszko, we'd love to have you be part of that brand. And I am fine if you want to interrupt me at any point with any questions, all right? Let's move on to health and service. So one of the areas that we've been working on here is E. coli, and we were just talking about this with our Parks and Recreation Superintendent, Larry Plummer, just this past week. He was talking about this study that was done a few years ago. We identified the pier configuration as well as the beach raking procedure that they were using as 2 things that could be changed to reduce E. coli levels at Pike and Center Lakes. Those 2 lakes had been closed about 30 to 40% of the time over the 15 years before this study. Since then, they've been closed very little, if at all, since that study and those recommendations. And we're really appreciative that the city has taken those recommendations. The beach raking changed almost immediately after the study, and the piers take a little more engineering, but that's in the works as well. And the mayor gave me an update on that this past week, that's happening too. So we're really excited about that, and a big success story of us working with you all. Another health and service area that we work in is blue-green algae toxins, and so we sample all 3 of these lakes every week all summer long, and we notify the public if there's any problems, either at the human health threshold or at the pet health threshold. We're finding the drivers for the algae production. You maybe noticed those pictures off to the right there. That one was the top one was around Christmas time when Center Lake turned a reddish color. That could be seen with aerial photographs. That was because of blue-green algae. And those toxins lasted all the way into June when we had the Lakes Festival, and we were nervous about not being able to be in the lake for the Lakes Festival because of those algae toxins. The picture down on the bottom there was just from last year on Chapman Lake, Big Chapman Lake, and we had levels in this area where this picture was taken of 100 parts per billion. 0.8 is where the threshold is to keep dogs out of the water. 8.0 is where people start to need to limit recreational contact. These levels on Chapman were at 100 parts per billion. So we want to understand when the algae decides to produce the toxin, because we've had, especially on Winona Lake, really high algae populations, but very low toxin levels, and we're trying to figure out why is that. Another health and service area that we work in is chemical spills and fish kills. Remember, we had a string of them back several years ago. It's been a little quieter since then, as you can see looking through those. But we still have been having different events happening over the years. And as the mayor likes to tell the story in different meetings I've been part of, when state agencies come in to look at these sort of events, they quickly assess and are quick to say everything's fine and move on, whereas we continue to stay in the community trying to figure out how to make that not happen again in the future, as well as doing a little bit more thorough sampling to make sure that it indeed is okay for our residents and visitors. Moving to the Parks and Recreation area, we are so excited to work with the City of Warsaw on the Lakes Festival. We've just had a meeting this past week with some new ideas for this next year, with partnering maybe with one of the city's other events, and so we're excited to continue to push that forward. Historically, this has been the largest festival in Kosciuszko County, and so we want to see that continue as a really important part of our community, our identity, and also helping people better take care of our lakes as well. Another Parks and Recreation area is the Tippecanoe River cleanup project that we worked on a few years back, where we cleaned out a lot of fallen trees that were creating log jams, and we had a lot of different partners as involved with that project. And one new thing just this year, a new business just popped up. We worked out with a couple KLA groups to do white papers, and a canoe livery idea came up 2 years in a row, and now there is a canoe livery. So the Tippecanoe River Adventures is a new startup business here in our county, running trips on the Tippecanoe River that would only be possible from this big cleanup effort with all of these partners a few years back. And they still then have a vested interest in keeping the river open now because of this new business. So we wish them well and excited about that business finally taking off. And then the last area there is our scientific facility. We have the Dr. Danae Miller Science Complex on campus at Grace College. If you haven't been there, it is amazing. Such a blessing to Grace College's campus, but also the entire community. We run field trips through there We just surpassed the 50,000 student mark this past year. So 50,000 K-12 students have been impacted by our K-12 programs. And it's not just the quantity, it's also the quality. A couple years ago, we got the Governor's Award for the top environmental education program in the whole state of Indiana. And so these programs are high quality, lots of students moving through, and this next school year, we're projecting a record number of 7,000 student interactions this next year, K-12 students. And so a lot of those will be coming right through our science facility on campus. You can see some of the pictures there. Students get to touch frogs and turtles. They get to be outside. You can see the lobby area there in the bottom right corner with the biggest fish tank in our county, the only green roof, top right there, that's the only green roof in our county. We've got a rain garden there as well, you can see in the rainy weather and top center. And so just a wonderful opportunity. And another thing I'll mention about education, not the K-12, but the college student education, we probably have over 100 environmental professionals now in northern Indiana that have been trained in our environmental science program at Grace College, and most of them have been interns with the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams. And so they're working at zoos, they're working as environmental lawyers, they're working as environmental consultants, they're working for the DNR, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, they're working for municipalities as in Parks and Rec or in health departments, teachers, arborists, which means they're tree experts, fish hatcheries, the list goes on. And so we're really proud of our graduates. And so not only are these folks helping as their interns here, but when they graduate, they continue to help our region as environmental professionals. And so we're really proud of them. My last slide is just to say thank you. You are one of our loyal and generous supporters to keep our work going, and so thank you. We are serving the taxpayers of Warsaw alongside you, and so thank you for supporting us through the grants that you've given us each year. Any questions? Nobody interrupted me. Mike?
Back to the health part, you were talking about the algae in Center Lake.
Yeah.
Is that a natural occurring phenomena, or is that caused by runoff, or can you identify the source? And the second part of that question would be, is there anything you can do to mitigate that happening? Is it a seasonal thing, or?
Yeah, so a lot of questions in there. I could unpack that for the next 2 hours, but I won't. So seasonal, yes. So these blue-green algae, they grow the best when it's warm, stagnant water. So we do see an uptick in the algae population and in the toxin levels in the summertime, especially in the month of July, which just so happens to be when the most people and their pets are interacting with the water, unfortunately. So yes, is it natural or is it artificial? It's some of both. We have research projects going back, not that we did, but other groups did back in the 1920s, which identify some of these algae being in Lake Wawasee back in the 20s. Now, they didn't know about the toxin back then, so we don't know about toxin concentrations. And they also didn't include the quantities of those algae, what the population was, but we know they were present in our lakes even over 100 years ago. So they're natural, but what's unnatural about them is likely the levels that we're seeing and the amount of toxin that they're producing. And the reason I say that is because we've had another species move in called zebra mussels into our lakes. And those zebra mussels will eat good types of algae, but they won't eat this bad particular type of algae. So what we think the zebra mussels are doing is they're shifting the entire population structure of algae in our lakes towards the bad type of algae. So oftentimes in the middle of the summer, during that July, August timeframe, 90 or 95% of the algae in our lakes is blue-green algae. And that likely was not the case historically, where you would have had more green algae, diatoms, golden algae, some of the better types of algae that help the food chain. not the blue-green algae, which do very little for the food chain because nothing wants to eat it because it has the toxin in it. The other thing that's unnatural is the algae producing toxin certain times or not others. That's what we're trying to figure out. We have some clues. There seems to be some chemical signatures that maybe shift the algae towards producing toxin or not producing toxin. We're, alongside the toxin analysis, we're identifying what species of algae are in each of the lakes at any time, and we're keeping a library of those populations going back in time over the last 5-10 years. And so we can go back and look at what exactly was in Center Lake during a certain week, during a certain year. So if new information surfaces, we can go back and reanalyze those algae populations with our microscopes. So we're figuring that out. We're getting closer to that, but we don't have it completely figured out. One of the things is agriculture, where we have nutrients coming in. Those nutrients will help feed those algae, right? Could also be runoff from people's yards, golf courses, city streets, construction sites. But there seems to be a ratio there of certain nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus. This is where I could go on, but I won't. When that ratio starts to change, that seems to indicate when these algae start to grow really well and when they start producing toxin. So it could be that we get to the point where we can prescribe certain management strategies for a golf course, someone's yard, an agricultural field, that will help shift that nutrient ratio in the direction that the algae doesn't like and therefore doesn't produce the toxin. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a comment from me. Kudos to you and your team. I never envisioned back in 2008, 2009, when some of the gals sat down with me and
Yes.
wanted to do the first Lakes Festival. Never envisioned how the program would grow.
I remember sitting in that office right over here at WCDC there talking about how do we market this? How do we make it
Right.
bigger? Yeah. Well, and thank you, Cindy, for some of your early insights and how to connect with the downtown area too.
You mentioned, as far as bringing the E. coli down, one of the things that really had an impact was the way we rake. What did we change?
Yeah.
Did we just start raking?
Yeah.
Or what?
No, it was always raked. That's a good question, Jack. It was always raked, but what they were doing before in the morning was raking it under, so kind of tilling it under, right? So the goose waste or whatever that was there from before was still there, but you didn't see it. Then you get rainfall, and it washes that waste and that E. coli into that near shore area. And the way that these two lakes are oriented, I wish I had a pointer or something. Is there a pointer here?
Here,
No? You got a laser?
I do. Wait, there it is, that button right there.
Okay. So unlike, there's 7 public swimming beaches in Kosciuszko County. The only 2 that have these concrete pier structures are our 2 that we have here. So we have the one down here, and then we have on Pike Lake, we've got the one right here. And these pier structures happen to face towards a westerly direction whereas the wind is coming from, okay? And so what's happening then is you have wind predominantly coming from the west. It's a stagnant pocket, I call it sort of an elbow of water right along the pier there, that elbow. So as you get rainfall going through the beach sand, it's washing that waste and the associated E. coli into that little elbow area right there, and it's just sitting there. Warm, stagnant, summertime water. The E. coli can persist for weeks in that sort of an environment. And so the way they changed the raking is Larry and his team, they got rakes instead that will skim off the goose poop off the top of the sand surface. It goes into a hopper and they put it in the dumpster. So the waste is being removed rather than just tilled into the sand, and thus the E. coli is being removed as well. And now with the change of these pier structures in the future, that'll allow water to continue to flow, and currents can wash and replenish that water so you don't get that stagnant elbow area. Instead, you have fresh water that's continually flowing through the area. And so we should see very little, if any, E. coli going forward in the future. And we've already seen a drastic reduction. I should actually run those statistics from before and after the study because it was quite remarkable. I think Center was 33% closed and Pike was 44% or something like that over 15 years. I mean, that's a third of the time is a lot of time for those public beaches to be closed. And we figured out the problem. The city enacted a solution, which is really good.
All right, any other questions?
Nate, I don't have a question, but we've talked before. I want to strongly encourage you and your team. What resources do you need? How can we continue to protect what we have, learn more? And I would also encourage you, once you continue to work through all that, that you continue to come to boards like this, seeking those resources. We talk about investing in community and serving the community on the public side so the private can benefit. The numbers are staggering in dollars. The city of Lakes, that kind of thing. And so I want to thank you and then continue to encourage you to push investment resources to help your team and others doing this kind of thing. So thank you very much.
Good, we'll do that. Thanks, Jeff.
My only comment is you mentioned all of your graduates have gone on to serve in different capacities, and you didn't mention our very first stormwater coordinator who came from your program. And
Yeah.
It's very exciting to have
Yeah.
quality start that program.
Yes.
Ryan did a great job.
He did do a great
marvelous
job.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Nate, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great kid.
All right. Jeff, you want to come up and we'll get the AV taken care of and you can get started here. Make sure you're hooked up. Thanks, Dr. Bosch. Appreciate it. We should be. Here we go. Well, as we've done for the last few years, last several years, this has become a part of our budgeting process, is to look back on our actual spending and look ahead on our projected spending. And I think it gives you all a much better idea when you look at what you're charged to do, handling this budget, to know where we've been and where we're going. And I've been very, very pleased with the comprehensive financial plan's role in that process. So tonight, you all have copies that have been passed out. Tonight, Jeff is going to go through and give us an executive summary, if you will, of this year's comprehensive financial plan. So, Jeff?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity just to kind of give you some brief highlight overview of the results of this year's comprehensive financial plan study. Just as a quick review, as you all know, and I know I think everyone has been through this process multiple years. But really, the purpose of the plan, as Mayor, as you mentioned, is to be a useful tool, kind of going into the budget season, budget process, but also kind of going beyond that to really expand the planning horizon, looking ahead over the next several years. And where that becomes important is not only to ensure that budgeted operating expenses are covered, but also maintain adequate cash reserves on hand. But also maybe even equally as important is to develop a plan strategy to help pay for capital project needs that are coming down the pike. So the process, the analysis that we went through is the same that we've gone through in previous years. So as I said, just want to maybe go through and just highlight a few things here, and obviously, as you have questions, feel free to jump in. At a very high level, the city remained very resilient coming out of the pandemic. Hopefully we're out of the pandemic or close to it, but finished 2021, calendar year 2021 in a strong financial position. When we look at the projected or budgeted cash balances for 2021, ending cash balances compared to actual cash balances at the end of the year, actually outpaced the budget by roughly $500,000. So good positive trends through 2021, and again, good strong cash position. As we're noting here, roughly, the city had roughly we'll call it $40 million of cash within the city's major civil funds. At the end of 2020, the city had roughly $34.5 million, so we saw a little bit of a bump there, about $5 million increase in overall cash and investment balances. More specifically, the general fund at the end of the year had $7.8 million. You'll see we're noting here that equated to roughly 67% of the annual operating expenses. And the reason why that's important, the city has certain cash reserve policies, has established certain reserve cash policies. And, one of those is that within the operating funds, that cash balances never fall below roughly the 15 to 20% threshold. So you can see that the city's general fund is well ahead of that with a strong cash position. All right. So we're going to share a few statistics here, and I know this is kind of small, a little bit tough to see. Let's see if I can scan that a little bit. So we'll share a few metrics here that we feel like is important, that would be of interest to the council. This first graph here that you see is a graph, and these are graphs we've shown before in previous years, but this represents a 10-year history of the net property tax dollars that have been collected by the city, and also the circuit breaker property tax relief that the city has foregone or lost as a result of circuit breakers. I know it's hard to read this slide here, but in looking at the last 10 years, what we've seen, there's been sort of a positive and sort of a negative. The positive is, well, I'll start with the negative. Circuit breaker has increased over the 10-year period north of 80%. So we've seen those losses actually grow over time. That's the sort of the bad news. The good news is we've also seen growth in the net property tax revenue coming in. Not at the same level, not at the same pace, but still growth of over 50% over the last 10 years. So certainly, it's good to see that positive trend in net property tax dollars coming in. Some of that is still being offset and outpaced by circuit breaker credits within the county, and then as that funnels down to the city. So the second graph you see there, property tax relief, just a graph illustrating how much of the county circuit breaker losses or property tax relief the city absorbs. So the city absorbs out of $2.4 million, roughly 39% of the total circuit breaker within the county. So that's the largest percentage of all the overlapping units there. All right, so this next graph shows the trend in history of net assessed value over the last 10 years, and then we're overlaying that with the certified tax rate for each one of those years. A couple things to point out. We've actually seen tax rates remain fairly steady over 10 years. So we've actually seen an increase, but just a very small increase in tax rates, only about 8, 9% over that 10-year period. So obviously, a part of that is controlled spending, managing of spending the city's budget, but also a large portion of that is a result of the increase in assessed value within the city. So we've seen, roughly a 44% increase in assessed value over that 10-year period. And if you recall, there's really sort of an inverse relationship between assessed value and the tax rate. So as assessed value grows, generally speaking, you'll see the tax rate stay about the same or possibly even go down. And then also the reverse is true. If we see assessed valuation either stay the same or go down slightly, a lot of times we'll see the tax rate bump up over time, and that's because of that inverse relationship. So we've seen good, steady, healthy growth in assessed value, which is certainly a positive within the city. We're showing, up through 2022. I know Mayor and Len and I were talking the other day and looking at assessed valuation numbers that are coming out for 2023, and we're seeing an even more significant increase in assessed value. That's probably not a surprise. We're all seeing increases in our, likely seeing increases in our home values. So it's partly residential home values, but also businesses too that are coming into the city. So even with keeping the tax, sort of a sidebar, even with keeping the tax rate at the same level, if you see, obviously, if you see an increase in your residential home value, you could see an increase in your property tax bill. But that's assuming you're not at the tax caps. If you're below the tax caps, then you could see an increase in your property tax bill. So some good positive trends there. So in terms of operating cash balances, I mentioned, finishing the year 2022 with strong operating cash balances. This is a graph showing again over the last 10 years the trend in the major operating funds. So we've seen an increase of about 29% from 2012 up to 2021. So at the end of 2021, we saw a historical high, roughly $14 million of cash within the major operating funds. The next graph looks at spending, trends in spending. So we can see, again, over this 10-year window, that spending has increased, but at fairly low levels. We've seen spending since 2012 go up by about 17%. So if you do the math, on an annual basis.
Go ahead.
That's roughly, I know inflation's a little bit higher now, but historical inflationary figures, that's right around the range of annual inflation.
2-3% over the 10-year period. Am I
Right.
right as a layman? That's what I
Yep.
thought.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, just a
That's
couple
not bad.
percentage.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so, really strong trends there in terms of control over spending.
Yeah.
Keeping those expenditures and within those operating funds at manageable levels. All right, so again, kind of looking back, we've seen positive trends. I think we'll see that going forward. As I mentioned, kind of starting off the presentation, that one of the benefits of the comprehensive financial plan as a tool is to look at, identify certainly the capital project needs that the city has planned, and then look at ways to potentially fund those capital projects. Not going to go through all the capital projects. It's quite a list. And again, this is over the next 3 years is the window that we're looking at. But all in all, the total plan includes about $38 million of capital projects over the 3-year period. And you can see that we've sort of listed out some of the more significant projects here. The majority of these projects, as it stands, are anticipated to be paid with cash on hand. So a pay-go or pay-as-you-go basis. There are some projects, obviously, that will receive some grant money, some contributions that will certainly help and aid in paying for some of those capital projects. But the overwhelming majority at this point, we've assumed to be paid for with various cash resources within the city.
I would just add that as we look ahead in capital spending, oftentimes we know we're going to have the need. We haven't identified the source of funds for those capital projects. So oftentimes those that are into the future are really looking like we're not sure where that money's coming from, and it'd be natural to assume that that's coming from our cash. But we all know that we don't do projects unless we have those funded. We collaborate, we seek grants, we try and leverage those monies that we have. And I know this is always the message in this comprehensive financial plan, is that we've got to watch our capital spending, and that's always a good message. So just appreciate that, but there's always a reason that it looking out into the future. Sometimes we haven't identified the sources of leverage for these funds.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. That's a good segue really into this graph here. This is where we're looking, sort of pivot to look more prospectively, and that point is very relevant. What you'll see here is, sort of a downward trend, and what this reflects are the actual, the first 2 years are actual cash balances, or the first 3 years rather. Then we're projecting out for 2023, 22, 23, 24 at this downward trend. What that assumes is that all of the projects are completed, and those projects are paid, again, the majority through cash on hand. We know that's probably not going to be the case. Projects get delayed, priorities change, the city may receive grant dollars or maybe contributions from the local community. So a lot of things that can happen. So I would sort of define this as a very conservative, probably mostly conservative financial forecast in terms of cash. Again, assuming that all the projects are paid for with cash on hand. But if the city were to take all these on, pay for them completely through cash, we would see a spend out of the existing cash reserves. So as a whole, certainly there's sufficient cash to be able to take on those projects, but on an individual fund basis, there would be funds, particular funds or departments that would see a recession or negative cash balances if those projects were actually spent down. Okay, so sort of a high-level findings. I'm also sharing here some proposed action plan alternatives, which we won't go through all in detail here. But as I just mentioned, and as the mayor pointed out, if we were to take on, the city were to take on and pay for all these capital projects with cash, we'd obviously see a spend down of cash over that 3-year period. It's not what we would anticipate. We haven't seen that actually occur in the past. But again, just kind of keeping those projects identified and keeping them on the capital planning list is helpful from a planning perspective. The other thing I think I wanted to just point out, and again, we'll kind of go through these, there are certain alternatives that the city could consider, and these are probably will be familiar to you. Some of these are similar or the same alternatives that we've presented in the past. To the extent, sort of this alternative one, to the extent that there are certain funds that could experience shortfalls, there's always the ability, as you're aware, to shift some of the property tax levy from healthier funds to less healthy funds. And that can always be done after the 1782 notice comes out later in the year. That's obviously a tool, an alternative that the city always has at hand. Again, sort of just a general comment, always looking at assessing fees. And it's always good to sort of reassess the city's fee structures, could be park fees, whatever it is, whatever service is being provided, just to ensure that those fees are adequate to support the operations of that department. And that, going through that process, obviously, that can help generate some additional revenue and put a little less pressure on tax dollars. One of the other alternatives to look at in terms of paying for capital is to look at certain funds that legally can be used to pay for capital type projects. One of those is the CCD fund, and there are others, CEDAT, for example. Again, this is nothing new. The city looks at this on an annual basis, looking to see, okay, what projects do we have? What projects could we take off some of the less healthier funds and maybe use some of these capital type funds to pay for those projects? So CCD was just an example here that, through the projection period, there's roughly between $300,000 and $600,000 available that could be used towards capital projects. Alternative 4, again, just sort of speaks to looking to leverage TIF funds in those TIF areas to help pay for projects. I know that's something that the city and Jeremy are always looking to do. As we all know, there are American Rescue Plan dollars available that can be used for capital projects, as well as just supporting operations. Probably aware that the Treasury, when they came out with the final rule, really broadened or created more flexibility with the use of ARPA dollars. So there's some less restrictions, less guardrails there in terms of spending those dollars. And so the city, in addition to using those for capital projects, could even use those dollars to help support operations if needed. So obviously, developing that ARPA spending plan would be helpful and could help with paying some of the capital projects. Alternative 6, I did want to kind of touch on this one. I mentioned earlier, as we saw the increase in assessed valuation. With that increase, that also increases the city's ability to issue what we call general obligation bonds, which is essentially they're bonds that are secured with or paid for with or by property tax dollars. So each governmental entity or unit within the state, there's a constitutional debt limit, which is 2%. So the city technically cannot issue more than 2% of its assessed valuation in terms of general obligation debt, although there are mechanisms to work around that, legal mechanisms. But generally speaking, as we see this assessed valuation rise, that increases the city's ability to issue tax-supported debt. We're not necessarily recommending here tonight that the city issue debt, but we're seeing in a lot of communities that it's creating an opportunity to potentially issue debt without much impact in the tax rate, without much of a tax increase. And again, because of the increases that we're seeing in assessed valuation, that's helping to kind of keep the overall tax impact down, but at the same time generating new funds, new dollars for capital projects. So as of the end of 2022, the city had roughly $4.9 million in bonding capacity, meaning the city could issue up to $4.9 million in debt and pay that back through property tax revenues or other sources available to the city. And I'll make, I guess, one other point. I meant to point this out earlier with respect to assessed valuation. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware that the city always gives sort of a standard growth in the levy each year. There's a percentage that every unit is allowed. That's the same percentage for every taxing unit to where you can grow your levy. There's also an opportunity to look at sort of a special growth quotient that's looking at, if you do a look back over the last 3 years, if that historical growth and assessed value exceeds generally speaking, exceeds the standard growth quotient, then you can make a case before the DLGF to be able to grow your levy at a higher rate than what the standard rate is. So might be something to look at, when we get into 2023, because right now the 2023 assessed valuation numbers aren't included in that 3-year growth look back. But, once we have 2023, which we do now, next year, that might be something to consider doing during next year's budget season. All right. I think the rest of these are pretty, you're pretty familiar with. We're always looking for opportunities to refund city's outstanding bonds, which we've done in the past. There aren't any currently that are good candidates. Some of you are probably aware that we've seen all of you are aware that we've seen an increase in interest rates. And that can also impact interest rates within the bond market as well. So we've seen an uptick in interest rates within the bond market, although they're still historically low when you look back at the last 40 or 50 years. But nonetheless, we're still seeing an uptick in rates in the bond market. So we'll continue to look at that as a potential opportunity. Obviously, looking at reducing or delay portions of the capital plan, which the city is always looking at doing. And then lastly, alternative 9 that we share here is that you may recall we've had this discussion in the past, but the CCD tax rate, the maximum rate that you can have or levy is 5 cents. As your assessed valuation grows, then again that inverse relationship kicks in and we see the CCD rate starting to erode over time. It hasn't eroded completely, but we have seen that come down a little bit. It's somewhere between the 4 and 5%. So, we would recommend that the city consider reestablishing that, which you can reestablish at the beginning of the year. There's a window of opportunity at the beginning of each calendar year to do that. And once you do that, then you can remain at the full 5 cents and maximize the amount of CCD revenue that you have. Okay, very good. All right, so overall, I think the message is positive. Again, we're seeing growth financially. We're seeing stronger cash balances. Obviously, there's a large demand for capital needs and capital projects as the city grows, so we're seeing that as well. But all in all, I think, looking back at 2021, looking ahead, I think the financial outlook is positive for the city. So with that, is there any questions that you have?
So did we recently reestablish that CCD fund? Didn't we do that just
Yes.
not very long ago? I thought we did.
And the fire equipment as well.
Okay. all right.
So they're both good to go for next year
Okay.
at their full rate.
So if you had one recommendation for us, what would it be, if there is one?
Well, I don't know if it's a recommendation, but maybe just an observation, is to keep doing what you're doing. The growth in assessed valuation is really key. So we've seen growth in your industry, which certainly helps. Where we see communities that tend to falter a little bit financially are those that are stagnant or receding in terms of economic development, looking for opportunities to grow business. And I know that's nothing new, that's not a surprise, but just continuing to grow that assessed valuation, continuing the process of looking at, the multi-year planning process looking beyond just the current budget year, is something that I think is very helpful. And to be honest, not all communities do that. A lot of them are just focused on the next 12 months or so. So I think keeping that planning perspective, that perspective in mind, I think is very, very helpful. And just, again, just continuing to live within the city's means. As we pointed out, you've been able to grow your cash balances, not just for the sake of growing cash balances, but to maintain the financial viability of the city, putting the city in a strong position that a lot of these projects can be paid for with cash, and you don't always have to go out and borrow. So I think really a combination of things, but I think just continuing to grow, grow the city's tax base, the assessed valuation of the city.
Thank you.
I just want to comment that since we started doing this, and is this our 4th or 5th year?
I would say so.
It's
Yeah.
either 4 or 5, yeah, it's either 4 or 5.
I've just
I think
seen a big difference in how we look at things and kind of look forward and can plan ahead. And when you have a plan, if you have to make an adjustment, you know where you went off course and where to come back to. And I think that's like a really big difference that I see in our ability to plan and establishing what we wanted as the minimum amounts, in each fund. Then we can look at the individual ones and see where we do need to maybe shore up or look at, are we spending more than what we're bringing in, and is that what we want to do? I mean, that may not always be the worst thing. For instance, park programs, we may be providing some of those as a public service, but then can we continue to sustain that? Do we have other means of bringing funds in to that area to support that, that kind of thing? So I think it's just really helped for us to be able to plan forward like this. I know I've really appreciated it. I think this is my 13th or 14th year on the council, and just seeing that change in what happens when you do plan like this has been really helpful to me. When I look at a budget now, I don't just look at this year's budget. I'm looking forward to where we might be wanting to go and making sure we're not depleting or overspending, so that we do have those reserves when we know we have something coming up. And I think I've seen a change in our department heads, because then they plan ahead too, to when, they know they're having their big projects coming up and things they're going to need, and kind of make us aware of that so that we always are moving. And I like that feeling of moving instead of reacting. I like being proactive rather than reacting to situations. So I know Jack and Joe and Lynn and yourself, I appreciate you guys providing us with this information.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and really, if we go back, sort of the genesis of this type of planning, sort of as a sidebar, this type of planning wasn't always being done 10 years ago even. And when we went through, this is really sort of birthed out of the last, was it Great Recession in 2008. And I want to say maybe the city of Elkhart, city of Huntington or city of Elkhart was one of the first communities, I think, that we worked on, because they were being impacted so heavily, but by the recession, and just sort of grown out of the need of, hey, we need to have a more forward-looking financial plan, because when we see ourselves, and hopefully we're not, technically we're in a recession, but who knows what's going to happen 3 years, 2 years down the road, and having this type of tool, I think is very helpful, because you can be proactive, but then it allows you to be reactive and pivot very quickly if needed. If we start seeing assessed valuations coming down, or reductions in property tax revenues coming in, those types of things can really be helpful in seasons like that as well. So, yeah, appreciate that.
Your one slide, forecasted ending cash and investment balances, I find interesting, because it tends to paint kind of a dire picture, and yet we know we're not going to end up that way, because we are constantly planning on trying to keep that cash balance up. There will be projects that we don't do, or there will be other ways of gaining that cash. But I really appreciate this slide, because it drives us to do that as well. It drives us to try to keep that up. It would be interesting to see what that slide looked like 2 years ago when you projected where we would be in 2022.
Yeah, and that might be an interesting exercise to go through, is to kind of share, hey, what had we projected, looking back over the last 4 or 5 years, and how did you actually perform? And obviously what we would see is you clearly outperformed what we would project because of the conservative type nature. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Jack, I mean, it can't, if out of context, this could be, oh, this is not good, right? We're really spending dollars down, but really this is part of the planning process. We can see if we did everything and paid cash for everything, this is what it would be like. We know we're not going to do that, but this just sort of provides that baseline.
It's a really good tool to avoid that.
The other part about this is, when I talk to the department heads about planning their capital expenditures for the next 3 years, I kind of tell them nothing's off the table. We need to know what you want, what you're going to need. And it's hard to look 2 and 3 years out. But that's another reason probably the projects are a little top heavy with what we're actually going to do. But it gives us somewhat of a list, and then we start paring down the priorities, as you mentioned. And if someone can leverage our funds with a grant or a donation, there you go. So, but yeah, there's a lot of, that's a wish list the next 2 and 3 years. Jeff, thank you very much. It's always very insightful to have you interpret this pretty sophisticated document. I think it helps now to go back and look at it. And you made a great point of maybe pulling your old ones out and seeing what it looked like we were going to do this year and where we actually ended up. So, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Item 4 is a county non-binding budget recommendation that we are required by IC code to allow the council to review our budget and make recommendations. You can read those in your reports or in written communications. That's item number 4.
It's kind of interesting just to see that document in light of the report that we just
He's
saw.
just going to, exactly.
They just like dovetail.
I
Yeah.
thought the same thing.
It's like, well, we're way ahead of this little letter here.
They're required to send this.
Right,
every-
That's what
exactly.
we said.
Yeah, it's nice
it's
to know
required by
that
IC
we're
code,
way,
but-
way on track.
All right. All right, let's move into new business. This afternoon at the Fire Territory Board, Chief Holderman requested the transfer of funds that he's going to ask you about tonight. It was approved by the Fire Territory Board, so Chief Holderman is asking to make some transfers in his budget.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, good to see you all. Sorry to have to do this after such a wonderful budget presentation. I'm seeking permission to transfer funds in the fire territory operating as follows. We would like to move $40,000 from our 2243-300, our machinery and equipment, to our 2243-220 operating. We're going to be a little shy in diesel fuel. We're projected to run about 1,000 more calls than we did last year. That also comes, all of our EMS supplies and stuff come out of there, so we are going to be short. So we are requesting the $40,000 from that one. Secondly, we are requesting $15,000 to be moved from the 2243-449, our other capital outlays, to 2243-320, communications and transportation / training. This transfers to accommodate training and communication costs, the DRI dive class that we just had, and to kind of button up the last part of the year in training. And then lastly, we are requesting 5,000 from the 2243 professional services to 2243-390, the other services and charges. And this is to accommodate decaling and lettering the new battalion chief's vehicle from that particular appropriation, and that'll be all we do with that for the rest of the year. And those are the last three.
Questions?
I would just make a real quick statement today at the fire territory meeting. I did ask the chief about the $40,000. That's a big number, and he said it, and you may not have heard it, but he said they have 1,000 more runs this year than last year. And to my right it's another board member who used to be on the fire department, and he said when he joined fire department, his first year they had 1,000 runs, the whole year. And this year they have 1,000 more than last year. And diesel fuel is more expensive, as we all know. So just a side note, I thought I'd throw it out there to you. It was approved unanimously.
All right, anyone else? Is there a motion then to entertain Resolution 2022-0901?
I move we, okay.
Jack was first, Jerry was second, so there you go. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you.
Appreciate your time, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. All right, item number 2 is Resolution 2022-0902, Deer Task Force establishing nuisance areas. Turn this over to Councilman Gross.
Okay, thank you. Starting with the mayor, this board, all the way down to the archers in the field, thank you for your past support. Every September, we come to you asking for a resolution that will establish nuisance zones within the city limits, which will allow us to create reduction zones, which will allow us to participate in reduction efforts targeting deer within the city limits. You will see in Exhibit A past nuisance zones that we're going to bring before you again this year, but like we had last year and even the several years now, the state of Indiana has given Warsaw and the surrounding area urban zone status, which means the state has identified this city as the entire city as a nuisance area. And so, but this will allow us, by passing this resolution, will allow us to take steps forward to have another season. Last year, we took 46 deer, 12 in public zones, 34 in private, 41 were doe, 5 were buck, which means 89% of the deer taken were doe, which our goal is 90% or more. You want to be very high because that means it's truly a reduction effort, not buck hunting. This year, we still have a few veteran archers that need training. We had our training a week ago, very successful. We went back to the old school, not just online. We had them go to the PD shoot, and we went through some protocols and expectations. We do have a handful of new archers this year. We did open it up, and I don't know exactly what the number is, but it looks like we're going to have 41 total this year. And hard to believe, Mayor, the mayor was with me back in 2006 after years of working on this. Right now, we are at 627 deer taken since its inception. And I would tell you that it's probably really close to 90% doe, like we had last year. I just couldn't see it back then, and because of archers in the field, the mayor, council members, the PD, countless volunteers, the system, the program has worked, and so thank you. Here tonight again asking for your support for this resolution. Any questions or?
When does your reduction effort start? Jeff?
September 15th, and it can go all the way, if you look in the resolution, to January 31st of next year, because the state has declared urban zone status for this area in different areas of our county, so.
I noticed too that your maps reflect our population growth areas, and I appreciate you looking at those and adjusting them as we go to see as that we annex new properties in to make sure that we're covering those.
It was like a year or two ago I did it. This year I didn't, when I found out that we had urban, so once urban zone status is given, that means the entire corporate limits is now a nuisance zone. And so that sort of takes the pressure off of making sure that we are very, very specific on the nuisance. Remember, nuisance zone allows us to create hunting zones, which are called reduction zones. And this is how the state even speaks now as they work through all of this. So we don't always get urban zone status, but the past several years we have. And so that tells you the state recognizes the fact that we have too many deer in the area. So, which means what? More tags for the archers. So if normally you can take, I'm making this up, okay? You can take 3, urban zone status might double that number for an archer. They're saying we want you to hunt and take more. So.
Question I have for you, Jeff. I deer hunt myself, so this is something that, not here in town, but maybe that'll change soon. But some things that I know some local hunters where I hunt, they fill all their tags, and they have a 5-year supply of venison. So they'll donate it to those in need, take it to a butcher shop, and work with some local people to potentially help provide. Is that something that's in place here?
Yes, our archers are not required to do it, but if you were to take a look at the efforts from our archers in our program, many of them donate and have countless times.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Sometimes it can be difficult. COVID sort of made it more difficult because where you can take it and how it can be processed and all that. But
Sure.
We have several every year that donate.
Outstanding.
And it's just a good thing. I think when we went through the training a week ago, out of the 50 that were probably there for training, maybe more, I asked how many of you have been with us for over 10 years, and it was like, I'm a classroom teacher, it was like half the class raised their hand. It was crazy. So a lot of these archers, community service, they hunt like you in the county and all that, but they know they can come in here and help the residents with the deer overpopulation. So it's really neat. Remember, we give them all kinds of rules and guidelines that they don't have normally in the county, a lot of restrictions. And they still follow those rules and work with us. And so it's a privilege to be a part of it. So I'm just one of many.
Well, I think another important thing is it's not just about deer not eating the garden or running into your cars, but when you have an overpopulation, then you have disease, and then that spreads into other domestic animals, and they crawl into the lake and die. We just talked about lake, but I mean, you have other issues when there are too many, besides just the fact that they're a nuisance.
There are archers in our program, and with our logging, everything is online now. It is unbelievable. I have guys they're techies, and there are guys coming down from the tree that are logging in, and it comes up. I've shown the mayor. It's amazing how you can track everything. Well, they'll send pictures and they'll communicate. I see more of the communication now that I didn't, and a lot of them will send unhealthy. You can see Jeff. So they're the information that we gather, and now that I can even see, normally I have others do that to help me, but with this online steps that we've taken, it's really helped us with information that supports our efforts. It's not perfect, but it does support what we're trying to do. We can back up what we're doing. So.
Josh, I do know too, in response to what you were asking, a women's club recently had Fellowship Missions come and speak with us, and I do know they get donations of venison there.
Awesome. Thanks for letting me know.
Jeff, you might have mentioned it. Are these nuisance areas any different from last year?
No, I did not change them, to be honest, because of the urban status that we had received, and that again trumps it. What we don't want to do is sort of like the planning with budgeting. We don't want to just tell everyone, oh yeah, we can hunt over here or there. That shows you that we have identified areas where we know there are deer, we know there are complaints, and then that assists us within those zones to pick areas that follow all of our safety protocols, which a lot of people think we can, why can't you hunt here or do, well, because our safety protocols don't allow it. The urban zone status, like I've said several times, takes all the pressure off because the state is saying you have a problem citywide. And so, but we'll probably have 4 or 5 public, all online now as they go. It used to be go to the police department and all that. It's all online. It's incredible what they've done. And then we'll probably have 20 to 25 private properties, which when the mayor and I first signed off on this, there were no private properties. It was just a handful of public. We just didn't, so it's constantly evolving. And again, I don't think, Joe, you would have said 627 deer. Think of that when we started back in the early 2000s. So, and again, it's a credit to so many people. You're a part of it. And many throughout the state, other cities. You could even argue the country hasn't been, they see what we're doing. Well, they're watching what we do on our website. And I told the guys several years ago when they started to move online, now we're all online. There will be other communities. In fact, the state may start asking to go online because of just the ability to have information and data collection. So, and these guys are all volunteers. They do this just to help the community.
So what is the website?
There are links that I could actually get to you that you could have access to, and you could actually see them on your computer also.
Okay.
So I'd like to do that another, but I can show you.
Sure.
The archers go to our city website, they go to the police department, our DDF page, and they have links. Also, our leadership team sends them out things and shared documents. It's unbelievable what we have. And I would love to show you how to get to it so you could see it like I do. Yeah.
And I think early on, we consulted tednugent.com.
Ted Nugent, I have been on his website. Believe me. Now, think about that for a minute. Bloomington, down south, a lot of the southern states were already doing stuff like this, but even language within the state code, you'll hear nuisance, reduction, earn a buck, all this stuff that we now do. And yeah, so it's just been really neat. But what a great group of leadership. And again, it starts with the mayor and all the way down to the guy in the field, but there's just so many people that have done a great job with it, so.
Further questions before we consider 2022-0902 resolution?
I'd just like to thank Jeff for all the work he's put into this thing, year after year
Many
after
years.
year.
Speaking of volunteers,
Yeah, thank you.
I'll make a motion that we pass resolution 2022-0902.
And I will second it.
All right, any further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. And the final item tonight is Resolution 2022-0903. This is just basically grant money that came from the FAA for the north-south runway rehabilitation. That's reimbursing Nick's budget for some funds spent out of 2206 000444. It's an amount of $37,924.88. Just putting grant money back into his budget that he spent for that project. Questions?
I would move to approve Resolution 2022-09-03.
All right.
I'll second.
Cindy, and then Josh. All right, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. Thank you. Any other matters come before the council tonight? Any other items carried forward? Questions or comments? All
Hi,
right,
Brian.
I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Might there be a second?
Gary.
Gary, all right. Thank you.
Brian, you okay? Yeah, good, just keeping an eye on us or what?
I don't know what it is.
Oh, with the seat, okay, good,
Give
okay.
an antibiotic and suffered kind of like
He
you
needs all the
lost
help
his
he can get,
voice.
Bob.
How long did it last?
I
There you go.
would say